Hi there. Welcome to Real Talk live at the barn. My name is Emilio Pardo, and I am so glad you're here. This is a very special place, the barn. So 21 years ago, we built this barn for friends and family, for conversation, for playing, for listening to music, but then slowly and gradually became a place to have a conversation about how to get through life, how to get through the week, how to get through the day. So as you can see, it is filled with memorabilia of different places that we've been and where people have brought us some trinkets from all around the world. But the real magic of this barn is the conversations and the real talk we've had here and the answers that we have found to some of our greatest problems. You see, we're going to three pandemics: a COVID pandemic, an economic pandemic, and a racial injustice pandemic. All three of these are creating havoc on our mental strength, and we need real talk to find real answers. You see, I know about real talk. I'm a cancer survivor, pancreatic cancer, but I'm also a communications practitioner that has helped many companies and organizations find answers and solutions to their problems. Now, we want to open up this barn and have real talk and pair you up with experts that can help us find some answers and tips on how to get through the day and how to get through these pandemics. So, welcome, sit back, pull up a chair, and let's have a real conversation. Let's get started. Welcome once again. I am so glad you're here. The barn is open for real talk. First of all, I want to say thank you to so many of you that have reached out from the last episode. And frankly, I've been overwhelmed and humbled by your comments, your stories, your tips. And this is why we're doing this show today. Today, we are talking about something that probably all of us are feeling. I know I am feel every day by stress. And you have reached out to me and said, this is hitting me every single day that I try to wake up in the morning, and we're surrounded by stress. So I am so glad that the barn today is going to bring in some of the best experts that we have in America that deal with this. And I'm so happy to introduce you to some of our friends that are here today, including Dr. Janet Taylor, which I will introduce in a minute. But the barn is about real talk, and it's about approaching this issue from not only a local, how do I feel internally, but also how and what can I do in small steps to deal with this onslaught. So as you know, I'm a corporate hack that deals with insights and data before you jump into solutions. And I wanted to set this up today to help us understand why we're feeling the way we're feeling and why we're surrounded by so many things. So I reached out to our friends in the corporate world and McKinsey and Company, and I found a chart that I want to share with you as we bring on our guests here today. And I want to preface by saying that this subject is a very emotional subject. We are all dealing with an enormous amount of stress, and as you can see here in the chart in front of you, there's a reason why we're surrounded by this stuff. I mean, from the minute that you wake up in the morning, every aspect of our lives today has been changed by any one of the three, what I call the three pandemics, whether it's the COVID pandemic and fear of that, whether it's the economic pandemic and dealing with what do I do next with my budgets, or I don't even have a budget, and racial injustice pandemic. These are accumulating, and as you can see from this chart, we're surrounded by it at work. We're working from our living rooms, if we're working at all. Learning, look at what's going on with our kids. Everything has changed from in-house to school to your living room in the way that we learn without that human interaction, and that's creating a lot of stress. Communication information. Now we're in the Zoom world where our communication is pretty much a 10-inch by 8-inch screen rather than human interaction, and it can't even travel. The travel is difficult, as you have experienced with airlines at 70% less capacity than before. Can't even go to a shopping experience that is the same as it was before, as you can see here. And life at home is fun, but now all of a sudden you're getting to get to know the people that you live with. Probably at times a little bit too close. But as you can see, everything in our lives has changed, and that's why we want to break down this conversation. It's not just about stress and how to deal with it, but we need to also understand the why behind it. So let's get started. Let's jump in, because really what we really want to talk about is how do we deal with all of this. And I cannot imagine a better guest and a better partner, a dear friend, Dr. Janet Taylor, who is not only a psychiatrist, but has been on so many television shows. She is a natural at the advice mode, but also keeping it real. Dr. Janet Taylor has not only been involved with life coaching, but also dealing with grief and violence and inner city issues. She's in Sarasota now. Folks, Real Talk, welcome, Dr. Janet Taylor. Janet, it's so good to have you here at the barn.
Thank you, Emilio. I'm so happy to be here and so happy to be a friend of yours, even while we tackle this difficult but subject that we have to talk about, and that's certainly a stress.
Yeah, I know, and I appreciate it. Guys, Janet has been my coach for years as well, and whenever I get really stressed out, I pick up the phone and call her. So no, here we are. But Janet, let's get started. First of all, break it down for us, because we not only, I think it's helpful to know why also we're feeling how we're feeling, so that we can understand how we move our tips and tools around, but understanding where we are. But you are out there in the middle of the country dealing with this. You're in Florida now. What is going on with this onset? And how do we deal with this, and how do we get started?
Well, as you mentioned the word stress, I think it's important that your viewers recognize that stress is just a word, and it's important for every individual to know what it means to them, how it affects them physically, how it affects them psychologically. And there's no question, almost half of all Americans were stressed before we had, as you mentioned, these 3 pandemics, which are real in the sense that it is not only, there are almost 200,000 families who have lost someone, who are still struggling in grief, but it's real in the sense that it has made all of us feel more vulnerable. And when we feel unvulnerable, our brain can feel uncertain, our brains can feel confused. And so it can impact us at the cellular level. And then so you have the pandemic of COVID, which we're all certainly more aware of and worrying about. You have the impact of racism, which for 400 years, people of color have felt that, and in particular, Black people in America. But now that is certainly at its height. And then the reality of people losing jobs, the stress of whether you send your kids to school, having a roof over your head. So there's a lot going on right now, and people are tense and upset, and rightfully so.
What's going on? When you talk about emotions, do you have a breakdown on how we deal with that, and how do we start tackling that? And I think we have a couple of graphics here that we can share with folks to break this down.
Sure. So everything begins and ends in the brain, and emotions are how we feel, and how we feel can be triggered by, what we see, what we sense, a memory, a feeling. Those are our emotions. But it's important for people to distinguish what you're feeling, what you're, in terms of emotions, feeling physically in your body versus your thoughts. And so often an emotion can trigger a thought, and that thought is one that can be changed. So what do I mean by that? If we're on a plane and it drops 500 feet, we're going to get this feeling in the pit of our stomach. And that's like, oh my gosh, we're going to die. If you're a skydiver and you jump out of a plane and drop 500 feet, you're like, yes, this is what I paid for. So during this time, it's important to understand what your body is telling you, but also to use your brain to recognize your thoughts, and then take a concrete effort to have a plan, so that you don't let your thoughts control you. And what happens with our brain is the best asset that we have right now, because at those times when we recognize that we're feeling uncertain and don't know what's going to happen, our brain will panic and we go into that fight, flight, or freeze mode. So that lizard brain takes over. But if we allow ourselves to move through to the midbrain, which is where our memory, our feelings, what we sense is, and more importantly, our frontal cortex, where We can use what's called metacognition, that thinking about thinking. We can process what we need to do. So if you notice that you're feeling upset or uncertain, calm down, take some deep breaths, and allow your frontal cortex to have a plan. If you're worried about a budget, look at your finances, make a budget, focus on your health, focus on what's under your control so that our brains don't hijack us, because our brain wants us to feel settled. And as a result, when things are uncertain, our brain will make up worst case scenarios. So pull yourself back and allow yourself, know that you have everything you need to make the best decision, even in this time of turmoil, and just allow yourself to do that.
Mm-hmm. What about in the moment? I mean, we have so many people that by the end of September, they will probably have eviction notices. They will have what we now believe are, eviction, probably starting October. And that has to be at the bottom of the spectrum of fear, not knowing how do you even going to deal with this, with the emotions.
Yeah, there's no question. I mean, that vulnerability, that reality, if you look at Maslow in terms of, baseline security and having a roof over your head and financial security, I mean, that is at the core of everything. As parents, we want to keep our family safe. We want to keep ourselves safe. But the reality is the reality. So if you're in a situation where you may be evicted, know that you need to look at different agencies that can help. It may be a time, if you've never asked anyone for anything, that you might have to ask to borrow money. Or worst case, if you have to go live with someone or even go into a shelter, make that plan. Don't wait until the last moment. This is a time for prevention and protecting ourselves. And you see the 3 components of mental health. The World Health Organization says there's no physical health without mental health. This is a time when you need to know exactly what you're feeling in terms of where your emotions are, recognizing that how you feel can impact your thoughts, but know what you need to do. Psychological well-being is not just feeling happy. Psychological well-being is being in touch with your thoughts. And for most of us, times of stress, times of vulnerability, as we have made it through, that's where we have learned about our resilience, our strength. So really focus on what has made you stronger and what's made you better. And then social well-being is the connectedness. And it's difficult now with COVID because of social distancing, as it should be, and staying 6 feet apart. A lot of us don't have our normal networks that we may have at work or at school. You have to find your own resources and network, because mental health is not just being happy. Mental health is recognizing the range of your emotions and focusing on all those aspects so that you can make the right decision, knowing that we will get through this difficult time. It's going to get better.
Yeah, Janet, as I look at that slide, it tells a story, because it tells a story that we are surrounded, right, for the first time, or maybe for a long time, emotional, psychological, and social. I mean, that's pretty much everything that we have in our life.
Mm-hmm. But it's always been there. But I think, there's an African proverb that says, smooth seas don't make a skillful sailor. Mm-hmm. And so the fact is, I mean, all of those aspects have been there, but they're heightened again by the reality of vulnerability, the reality of the racial unrest, the reality, frankly, of the lack of leadership, my opinion, at the state and federal level, because when you have that kind of guidance, that can allow you to establish your control. So in the absence of that, we have to find research and factual information. We have to look at what we need for ourselves, our families, and find our own resources and really shore ourselves up. This slide, looking at the barriers to positive mental health, basically everything that was on that McKinsey slide for most people is being threatened right now. But it's, the point is, what you have to do is look at your own individual statistic. Often we can get caught in this really tsunami of horrible news, and understanding the media, and I know, Amelia, you've been in the media, and, you have that past life, but, it's negativity, it's fear that unfortunately drives newspapers, it drives people to finding out information. But we have to guard against that and search for things that are helpful to us and can make us feel better, because every single one of these that are on these barriers to positive mental health, people are faced with in a real way and challenged by. And so one thing to do is when you feel a certain way or you find yourself thinking in a negative way, reframe it. Ask yourself, what's another way to look at that? And the only thing I would add on this chart is if you have a history of trauma, all the vulnerability and trauma that's happening now can worsen your trauma. So if you are not connected to a mental health provider or healthcare practitioner, maybe you should look at finding one. And within your own homes, if, knowing that domestic violence has gone up because people are, frustrated, they're worried, they're in their homes. We know that up to 30% of people who ordinarily would report child abuse in terms of schools, that's down because of, kids not being in school. If you are in a traumatic situation, get help for yourself and get to safety.
What about practical tips? What do you have at the moment that you're seeing out there, if you were to summarize for us to think about as we're dealing with this onslaught?
Well, it's so important to think about the positive aspects of mental health. Frankly, as a psychiatrist, we get paid to tell people what's wrong with them and too often do not focus on what's right with people. So protective factors in terms of your own mental health are certainly religious and spiritual involvement, which doesn't mean you have to go to church all the time, but knowing that there's a higher power, whatever it takes for you to have that hope and knowing that, no matter what your journey's like, things can be better. The support that you get from family members and from your community, reach out and search and find those. And also to really look at what you need individually as, from a psychological perspective. In my own clinic, and I work in a community mental health clinic where, once the pandemic started, we were doing telemedicine and connected to my patients. And I thought, they're going to be okay. But now, it's been 6 months and people are really starting to feel overwhelmed. They don't know what's going to happen. A lot of eviction notices. I work with people who are addicted to opiates, and that same network that they had in terms of face-to-face jobs they have are falling through. So this is really a time to pay attention to your networks that you have, the resources, social services. We are still out there. So just make that connection and really find that. It's extremely important.
No, that's, one of the things that I get all the time is questions on, structure. How do I maintain some kind of structure? And we're going to talk a little bit about that in a few minutes here with a few of our friends that are coming into the barn to talk about what is happening in the front lines. But this is very important to have this, frankly, reset, as you have said, and fact-based, evidence-based information is what is a theme coming through. Can you separate fact from the rhetoric or from what you're seeing in a 24/7 media environment? It's hard to find the real facts. How do you do that? How do you help?
It's necessary. And so the one thing you want to do is consider the sources. I'm all for people putting their opinion online, but go to reputable places, whether it's, a news entity that you trust, whether it's organizations that generate news. It could be the CDC, the National Institute of Mental Health, NIMH, those kind of factors. Talk to your healthcare providers, but just don't focus on people's opinions. And the reset model really is about recovery, right? At the time we're in with chronic stress, that can worsen every medical problem that you have. And so you want to focus on getting your body back into balance. This is a time you need to sleep well. You need to eat mindfully, to practice positive coping skills, which does not include overindulging in alcohol or other substances, to reflect on times you've made it through and times have been different, to, as we mentioned, find the facts, use evidence-based care, look at your budget, the reality of it, find help for that if you need it, know your numbers. This is not a time to skip out on seeing your doctor or checking your blood glucose, to practice self-care where you put yourself at the top of your to-do list, which means learning to say no to people and also really understanding that you are the most important person in your life right now, to take care of yourself in a way to treat yourself as you would an old friend or your partner or your children, to establish what's under your control. Psychologically, performance-wise, and physically, it's up to you. And then doing what we're doing now, which is, learning from you, Emilio, and There is a Zoom fatigue for sure, but surrounding yourself with information and people who support you, going on walks that are where you're socially distant, getting outside, breathing fresh air, taking in your senses, paying attention to that, and then connecting to people in any way that you can, because we are social creatures, and understanding that loneliness is as big a risk factor for increasing chronic medical problems as smoking and drinking. So again, it's just
isolation is fatal.
Yeah, it is. That, as Richard Leiter is always said, and it truly is now. So it really is about putting the effort into maintaining your own health. There's this thing called post-traumatic growth, which is really, goes back centuries in terms of, we know that through turmoil you can be better, but it really is about you having a sense of yourself, understanding the sense that you in relationships that you have with your family and other people, and then really looking at reestablishing your we did a lot of work on purpose, but reestablishing your own philosophy about life. And from that, no matter how vulnerable you feel, how traumatic things are, there is a sense that you can gain wisdom and come out better on the other side, because you know your strength, you know your resilience, and what you can do when you feel threatened.
Yeah. Speaking of feeling threatened, and speaking of making it real, I am honored to welcome to the barn a very special guest, Janet, that we all are grateful to. We're talking about Tara Womack, who is gracing us with her presence. She is an IMCU nurse that has lived through probably unimaginable things that we have seen. Talk about stress, and also trying to keep up her own life as we go through. I am so thrilled to welcome you and welcome all of us to Tara. Tara, there you are. Welcome to the barn.
Thank you so much for having me on. It's a huge honor, and very nice to meet you, Dr. Taylor.
Nice to meet you too, Tara.
Yeah, everything you've been saying has just been amazing so far.
Yeah.
Well, Sarah, let's talk. Let's get real. Tell us a little bit about your journey. And listen, I know this is hard. I know how hard it is that you particularly, thank God now in Maryland that I believe you're in Maryland now, that our numbers are going down a little bit. So you have a little bit of a perspective probably, but tell us what are you experiencing? How are you feeling? And what was it like to be in the middle of that stress every day?
Ooh, so, at first it was very hard. Coming March, with everything that we were hearing on the news, we were going to get prepared for our first and only COVID patient. That's what we thought. So, just that uncertainty was very strong, and you could feel it throughout where I worked at the hospital. And then, a few weeks later, we're going from having one patient with COVID to our whole unit's COVID, to now we're going to our sister unit, having to use their rooms, and just still fully not knowing what this virus was about, not knowing how to treat people right off the bat, evidence-based practice, more of like, we're just all trying to figure this out as we go together. It was emotionally hard. Not only from a healthcare perspective, like I can't do everything I can to help you because we're still trying to learn, but also leaving and going home thinking, do I have it? Is it on me? Did I not wash enough? Did my PPE, my mask kind of slip a little bit? It took, I would say, 3 months for me to mentally not be so stressed out and anxious all the time, which I do struggle with anxiety and depression. So it was March and April were very hard for me.
Now, let me ask you a question that, and it's a very sensitive question, but what was it like when you are in the mode of caregiving and you have to witness, some of our patients pass? Did that happen in your watch?
It would. And that was very hard because I'm an IMCU nurse, not an ICU nurse. So when it came to the COVID patients actively dying, it wasn't as intense as ICU or ER. So my hat goes off to those frontline workers. But we definitely had a handful of deaths, and the death part itself was very hard to be a part of because they were dying alone. We couldn't have family there. The policies have changed now, but at first it was nobody can come in. So just knowing that this person had nobody, and a few months ago, they were like you and I, walking around completely healthy. It was emotionally hard to just be there for them and just hope that they're okay, but that their family is okay. Because now that's the hardest part, is facing family. Because since people still can't come in, we have a lot of FaceTime meetings, a lot of phone calls, and you can just hear in their voice their uncertainty and sadness. So it was hard to deal with a death back to back to back. It was even harder to know at the beginning of your shift, by the end, this patient might be in ICU because they're just not getting better. So just going in every day with that high level of anxiety and that stress, it was hard, but it was just more heartbreaking to really see patients actively dying a lot more than last year.
Hey, Tara, thank you for mentioning that you had anxiety and depression yourself. How are you managing, looking at what you're facing day to day, and then what do you do to keep yourself up and together?
I mean, I have to take mental breaks. One thing that you pointed on, and I think people take it for granted, is walking, getting fresh air. You know, you need nature. Nature gives off those positive vibrations, and not trying to sound new age, but you need that. You need fresh air. And, you know, people feeling that they need to stay indoors, please be healthy, be cautious. But if you can, go outside. So for me, taking mental breaks, going outside for walks, yoga, kind of praying, but also talking to people. I come from a very stoic family, very like, you keep it to yourself, brush it under the rug. If it's not hurting anybody, then don't bring it up. So now I'm very like, you know what? Let me talk. Husband of mine, let me talk to you. Families, let me tell you. There's power in talking. You know, there's power in words, and people don't realize that when the words that you think of can affect you. So I think it's being more aware of your brain and just realizing where you're at and what you're feeling, and being honest with yourself, not being ashamed or embarrassed and trying to brush it under the rug like, okay, we'll deal with it later. It's not real. It's real. Your brain is trying to process it.
Well, speaking of keeping it real, Janet, how in a moment like that, I mean, obviously Tara's experience is the ultimate of stress. I cannot imagine all of that, but you know, you talk about breathing, you talk about outdoors. I hear that a lot. You know, take a break, go outside, get in touch with nature. But Tara, from your perspective, where are you now, and what can you share with us to help others that are not in the same situation as you, but they're feeling the same way? They're feeling the same amount of stress, whether it's work, lack of intimacy, lack of whatever it is that we're experiencing. But any questions you have for Janet that we can use?
I mean, the questions I would have is, you know, what can we do to be more active outside of our brain? You know, does journaling help out that much? People keep telling me I should do that. I feel that there's a lot of people like me that come from a very stoic family that, you know, sweep it under the rug, and just over time that can get to you. So I think my opinion and my question for you is, when do you think is healthy to do that versus, okay, starting to hurt you? Like, do you have any dealings with that with people?
Sure. Well, I mean, as you mentioned, I mean, our brain never forgets, right? And so whatever we are experiencing, our brain is taking in. And as you noted yourself, like you said, you stopped being zipped up and talking about things. And there's a saying that I have that, you know, what you want to talk about is what hurts you. So that should not be a secret. What you want to hold on to is what makes you better, and that's sacred. So journaling is a way to get out secrets, you know, confronting people in the right way, people who have hurt you or said things in real time in a way that they can understand and you can be understood is important. Finding someone, if you don't have an outside person, like within your network, your partner, like losing the stigma about taking care of your psychological health and finding someone that you can talk to is important. Now, I mean, there should be no barrier, whether it's cost. There are free clinics, there are places around. We're doing telemedicine, but taking care of your mental health right now is so critical. And then not judging yourself and not feeling guilty because you feel a certain way. Guilt should be reserved for when you have done something wrong. Feeling the burden of managing yourself, your family, taking in other people's pain, hopefully should not make you feel guilty, but just really accepting and taking control of how you feel in a way that takes you above the line, in a way that you stay still, creative, you're committed to learning, you're not judgmental about yourself, you're asking questions and curious about how you can be the best that you can be without comparing yourself to other people, knowing the reality of the stressful lives that we are all living right now. So off to you for A, taking care of other people, and B, taking care of yourself and learning and being open about it. So thank you, Tara.
Thank you.
Yeah, and Tara, moving forward too, anything that we can do to help you as well. I mean, we're gonna try to keep this conversation going even beyond this conversation. But once again, thank you. I also want to introduce you now to, and by the way, here are the tips from Tara, which I love. What are the facts? That's the most important thing that we keep hearing. And I know it's really hard to do because you have to really separate those facts, right?
Yes, and I did forget to brush up on this one very important part, and this is where the hat goes off to my husband. During those moments of when I could tell it was my anxiety getting me versus what I was truly feeling, my husband would kind of just reground me and say, what are the facts? What are the emotions? Not saying we're forgetting about your emotions. Those are very valid, as you said, Dr. Taylor, but sitting down and thinking, what do I feel versus what are the actual facts? And again, talking about the facts more kind of helps you take control of your emotions better. So for me, that helped out, is focusing on the facts and not letting my emotions take the full control.
This is about as good as it gets, go facts, go outside, breathe. That's about as basic as it gets, but you know what? It works. I do it every day.
Yeah.
Speaking of, I want to show you, and I want to introduce you to another great friend to the barn, Kathy Bomji. Kathy Bomji is a life coach practitioner. I call a real person out here with us that is in the middle of dealing with the stress, not just for herself as a mom, as a wife, as someone who is also a practitioner, to helping people with another subject that is very, very important, which is grief. And how do you deal with grief? And, I have to say, we're all dealing with a little bit of grief right now that is even more beyond the definition of losing someone. It's the grief of our American life, American lifestyle, that we are grieving that we don't have. But I want to introduce you to Kathy. Kathy, welcome to the barn. There she is. Kathy has many years experience in this space, but Kathy, I also want you to share with our friends and our audience, how are you doing and what are you seeing right now that is an issue with this onslaught of stress and the people that you're dealing with every day? Welcome to
I'm sorry, I interrupted. What?
No, welcome to the barn.
Oh, thanks. You guys can't see me, but I've been in the room going, yes, exactly. You've got it. It's what really has been resonating is figuring out what you can control and making those changes, right? So I draw pictures. That's what I do in order to help my brain get through all of this stuff. And so having a way to understand what my brain is doing, why it's doing it, and then being able to do things that help it cope. And I see that with all kinds of people. I'm maybe getting off topic, Emilio, but
no. When you share with me a graphic that you have used, every day. Actually, Stefan, if you can put that up. That I found this graphic really, really insightful because it allows you to figure out, and let's explain it real quickly. And it's a little bit busy, but what's going on here?
It is. So it's my way of kind of understanding change and grief and the pandemics kind of all at the same time. So this is a combination of William Bridges' change theory Kubler-Ross's cycle kind of grief, and Dr. David Rock's work on neuro leadership. So we have this normal, I call it a wave or a roller coaster of grief, right? When something happens, when a change happens, loss is created. And in every loss, there's grief, whether it's a positive or a negative. You have a baby, you're excited, you've planned for this, but then there's loss with that. There's loss of sleep, there's loss of intimacy, there's loss of all kinds of things. And in that is this grief that maybe you're not even thinking about or being aware of. So in these pandemics, we are creating loss every moment of the day. So how do you grapple with that? And that's where David Rock's stuff comes into play. And it's this understanding that really what's happening is a loss of certainty, a loss of connection, and a loss of autonomy. So for me, putting that in one picture like this allows me to say, okay, but I can control some of that. And there are ways that I can help myself, and there are ways that I can help other people cope in this situation if I can just understand this picture, right?
Yeah, and you know what helped me with this picture, and Dr. Taylor, you can riff on this too, is that if you know where you are, right? It's that you know that you're in shock, you know you're angry, you know that you have to move your way to the other side. At least it gives you a point of reference that you're not alone. This is something that is happening not just to you, it's happening to millions of people. But this is a pattern, and it's normal to feel the way you're feeling. It's not normal not having the tools.
Right. And I think to your point, and thank you, Kathy, I love David Rock, Dr. Rock, and for having this graphic. But the point is, you need to know where you are, which means not being in denial and not acknowledging it. And there's also, where there is loss, there's also a gain. And that gain can be understanding. That gain can be wisdom. That gain can be a new resource. And so it's just important to know where you are so that you can shift and make your way, small steps to that point. And so, one thing about the brain, if we allow ourselves, our emotions change every 20 seconds. But what happens is sometimes we're so rooted in staying in what's negative, and part of that is our brain as well. Our brain remembers 70% more things that are negative that have happened to us in an attempt to keep us safe, which means we have to consciously recognize where we are and consciously make that shift, because we know where there's light, there's darkness, where there's despair, there's hope. There's always that yin and yang there. But the work is finding it, and the work and the beauty of it is that there are many resources that can help you do that.
Hey, Janet, how do you deal? Here's a great question from the audience. How do you deal with the misinformation? There's one thing to find facts, but aren't we also being bombarded with misinformation as well, and how to sift through that?
So, we are, and part of that, I think is at the an underlying psychology that has to be left with the people who consciously do that. But having your own sense of purpose, knowing your own goals, and going again to sources that are reputable, and looking at things that make you better. So misinformation is going to be out there because different people have different opinions, but I think we have to be a little more Teflon, let things roll off, and consciously search for positive information, consciously search for information that can help us in our quest to serve our own purpose, so we don't get just so bogged down that we feel hopeless. And that's how a lot of people feel. And if they could just take one little step, see the light, just kind of peer the curtains a little bit, then they can make that their own journey about what it is that they want. Because I can tell you one thing. I mean, I'm 58 years old. The older I get, the less little things bother me. The more important things are relationships, like my own positive mental health, less about what kind of house I live in, what kind of car I drive. And so I think, for me, as I kind of move along my, growth, my own growth, and I'm sure you, Amelia, as a cancer survivor, there's a whole new awareness about what's most important. And so we all have to go back to that for ourselves, so we don't get bogged down in things that we have absolutely no control over. Focus on what's under our control and how we deal with it.
I want to go back to, thank you, Janet, but, the other question too that I love here is that we need to understand that grief is normal.
Yeah.
right?
Absolutely.
It's normal.
Absolutely.
And that is how we need to, well, you start with that thought. But Kathy, what have you done? What tips can you share with us and with everybody that has helped, and that you see that is helping outside of even your own house, but what have you done that is helping with stress?
So you asked me this question earlier, and I just kind of rattled off these things because I'm going to back up a second. Part of what I hear, Janet, you talk about is self-awareness, really, and understanding yourself enough to know what's going to help you. So these 5 things are kind of the things I always turn to. We have a son in college, and he's actually feeling quite anxious at this moment, and asked me for help. And so part of how I help him and I help other people is adding structure to your day. I think when you don't have a full-time job, when you don't have a class schedule anymore, and you that keeps you kind of on track, you get lost. And days turn into nights, and the weekends become the same as the weekdays, and we're all experiencing some of that. So getting up at the same time every day, take a shower, exercise, have something nutritious to eat, attend a class or read a book or go for a walk, or but add that same structure to every.
And by the way,
day.
Kathy, that's especially true in the younger people.
Absolutely.
I have a 22-year-old, and you have several young men too, and it's get up and get rid of that pajama.
Well, it's funny. I facilitate bereavement groups, and in one of my bereavement groups, I had this woman look at me and she said, "I have a mantra: get up, get dressed, get out." And that's her mantra every day, and that's what helps her get through the day.
Sleep is important. We talked about nature already. This is a really good 5 battle stress pieces. There's another component though that I'm hearing underneath all of this is the lack of happiness and the lack of events that fulfill and give you a balance and maybe even hope into that. And I don't know if Christine Whelan Stefan, is Christine around? I know that she was. There she is.
There she is. Hi there.
Man, you need to know, folks. On the last show, people kept writing me. We need to hear more on the happiness. We need to hear more on Christine Whelan. Dr. Whelan, welcome back to the party.
Hey, thanks for having me on again.
You've heard some wonderful tips here from everybody, but Christine, thank you for joining us. This is a really tough subject, and it's one that it's very complex and it has multiple issues. One of them is, this gender gap, but also how do you bring back a little bit of happiness in the middle of stress? Any thoughts?
Yeah. Okay. So first of all, what we don't want to do is try to be saccharine, right? We don't want to sort of say, oh, just put on a happy face. These are really tough times. And one of the things that I talk to my students about is the 2 different kinds of happiness. So there is hedonic happiness and eudaimonic happiness. That's what Aristotle called these 2 different kinds of happiness. So hedonic happiness is happiness in the moment and pleasure, just pleasure pure and simple. Then there's eudaimonic happiness, which is the sense of giving of yourself and a life well lived, that also sometimes involves some sacrifice of hedonic happiness in the moment for the larger goal. And I think right now we are really being called to embrace eudaimonic happiness, where we have to figure out the meaning and purpose behind the sacrifices that we're making, so that we can find the good in our current situation. Whereas hedonic happiness might be saying, oh, forget all of this. I'm going to host a big Labor Day barbecue anyway and get all my friends together and have a big party. Eudaimonic happiness might say, you know what, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to go on some socially distanced walks with my friends instead, because I know the larger goal is to keep everybody safe, and I can feel good and get happiness from that as well. So I do kind of encourage people not to think that like every day has to be happy and smiling in the midst of a pandemic. We can lay off ourselves a little bit, but to try to find that larger meaning as a way to find a kind of a quieter happiness right now.
That's amazing. Tara, how are you finding moments of happiness in the middle of stress?
I mean, this is kind of morbid, but the fact that I can come home to a healthy family kind of just regroups me to think it could be a lot worse. So unfortunately, having to just, and I think that's what I really want to encourage people to do is there's a lot going on, but think about the happiness that you do have, even if it's something small. Cherish those. So that's what I do a lot more.
That's yeah. Christine, we talk a lot about gender and the millennials, the Gen Xers, and so on. Are there differences in what they're experiencing in stress from the boomers or older folks that are experiencing the same thing?
Yeah, so I mean, so first of all, we see a lot more of the emotional load on women, especially women who have children in the home right now. And I don't think we can underestimate the emotional and psychological work, the planning work, the invisible work that is putting a huge stress on women at this moment. So I think that's one group to really to look at and to support. At the same time, young people, I'm a college professor, and what I'm seeing right now is that we're all blaming college students for going out and being college students, for doing the things that is in fact their evolutionary imperative to do, right? If we think about it from a strict evolutionary standpoint, we have two imperatives, right? To survive and to reproduce. Well, these college kids are just getting out there and trying to do their best to meet people and get out there and have their social life. Yeah. What did we think was going to happen? Right? That's what they do. What did we think was going to happen? So, I think we have to all realize that generationally we are going to be at different points in this in this pandemic response. And I would try to blame young people a little bit less, but put more smarter structures around what we can and can't do, perhaps. But the idea of asking a bunch of college students to come back to college towns and then stay in their room and just do their homework. I don't know. You guys all have college kids. I mean, you know this drill. That ain't going to work.
That is so true. That is so true. And it's part of their development. I mean, if you think about it, that is part of their psychological development as they're going through. So, we're asking unimaginable change, and change brings stress. Even positive change brings stress.
Absolutely. And I'm seeing it in my younger kids as well. So I come from a family that has lots of anxiety to begin with. And with my fourth grader, the idea that she's in online school and that she's not with her friends and that things are all different. I mean, she was quelling her anxiety through a schedule, and the schedules are really changing right now. So as a family, we are trying to create those schedules without lying to her and without lying to ourselves. So, so at least what we're doing is we take it one day at a time. So I can tell her what the schedule is going to be for tomorrow. But I can't say, don't worry, sweetie, in a month you're going back to school, because that probably won't happen. So how to keep it real while creating the schedule and tamping down the anxiety. I don't know, Dr. Taylor, you maybe help me out here. How do we do this?
Yeah, what do you think?
Well, it is about truth. And I like what you said about not, as parents, we want to protect, everything's going to be okay, which it will. But I think the one day at a time teaches our children about the beauty of small steps and also the unpredictability of life. And so in unpredictability, you go to what you know. And what you know is you have parents who will take care of you. You have caregivers who will take care of you. There are things that we will do to stay safe. And so you point out those things. But I also want to acknowledge one group, like Tara, those essential workers who cannot afford to work from home, have to be out on the front line. 70% of them are Black or brown. Most of them are women. And my heart goes out to them, because a lot of them, their kids are in schools that, may not have access to the internet. A lot of schools don't have hot water. And so I just want to acknowledge the sacrifices happiness is not even in their realm. It's about survival that they are doing to keep the really shore up this country. And I just want to say thank you to those folks.
Absolutely.
Janet, that is such an amazing point. And, talk about a real conversation. You mentioned the disparities. Can you talk a little bit more about that for a few minutes on what can we do to help? Listen, when you only have $300 in your pocket and you haven't cashed that check in because that's the only check you have, and you've been evicted with a family and a son or a daughter, that is real. That goes beyond anything that you can ever imagine.
Yeah. So my experience is, and I've worked in my whole career has been with community psychiatry and people who are under-resourced. Those people usually know where to find, the $5 for diapers or what they need. But right now, those resources are drying up. But I think what we can do as a society is everyone can, as Angela Davis says, it's not enough to be a non-racist. We have to be anti-racist. I think the reckoning in this country is looking at disparities, is looking at attitudes and beliefs and thoughts, and how we can make everything more equitable, which starts with fairness and justice. So within households, we need to educate ourselves about racism and anti-racism. We need to understand that race, the color of one's skin, is a biologic social construct that is meaningless. Get to know people for who they are, get to know their struggles, get to know their hopes, their wishes, and try to make this world better. And I think that is the opportunity that we have right now, is to change the myth of white supremacy, which is a myth. White people are not better than Black people or brown people just because they're white, and really look at the fact that yes, Black lives matter, all lives matter, blue lives matter, but for 400 years, the Black body has been disrespected and gunned down, as we were seeing. And it's an opportunity to find a new humanity where we care about the souls of people. We look at policies and we look at how we treat people. And to me, that's the beauty of and the hope of where we are right now.
That's awesome. Yeah, and it is a hopeful moment as well as a tense moment in America. I would love to do a lightning round here to all of us that are dealing with stress, obviously. What is the one thing that you have done in the last 5 months or the last 4 months that has helped you? We've gotten a lot of great tips here, but this one is a little bit different. What have you done that has fulfilled your sense of hope that there is an end to this? And there will be, folks. We will get through this, but we will be a very different country, and we will be I think, will be a very different environment. But, what is the one thing that you have been doing to help fulfill that sense of hope for the future? And we'll start with you, Kathy. Can you hear me? No, Kathy, there she is.
Okay, I was muted. Sorry. Family dinners with laughter and
That's
real
awesome.
Conversation.
That's awesome. Sarah, what do you have? Mute yourself. There you
All right. Educating myself and using it as power versus something that's a crutch.
go. That's awesome. Christine, I know you always have
Do you hear me?
something.
Okay.
Coming together with other parents to kind of create a community and crowdsource to help our children through this time. So really building a community with others in the same boat.
That's important. Structure. That's part of the structure is, and once again, I keep saying, don't go at it alone.
Yeah.
Even a phone call, we've all gotten used to Zoom, and we know the challenges with Zoom. But at least there's a connection there, right? A little bit of a structure there. Janet, what have you been doing down there in Florida to help?
Two things. One is recognizing how much I overscheduled myself and really, truly adapting to being home without wishing I was somewhere else, and appreciating that. And the other is I've been reading a lot about a history about the Reconstruction, and I just feel hopeful in the sense of I really feel like this is an opportunity to get some things right. So I really take solace in that. So I'd say reading and then just being home, even though I'm working full time and busier than ever, but just mindful and thankful for being alive, really.
That's awesome. That's awesome. I also want to do a shout out and bring on our amazing producer, Stefan Kaplan.
Hey.
Stefan, I know you're there. I know you're behind the scenes. Yeah, there he is. Yay, Stefan. He's the magic guy behind all of this. Make sure that we get all these great information out. Stefan, you are an expert in social media. One of the things that we hear all the time is the oversaturation of information in media. Listen, I'm guilty of that. I am completely addicted to news. It's part of my job. It's part of what I have to do. But it's 24/7 for me. In the viral world, no pun intended, it is all around you, and it is permanently around you. What tip do you have for folks as they go forward?
Yeah, we all have to have filters on with social media. And the important thing with social media, most of all right now, is I believe there's another pandemic. You listed 3 we know of. The health pandemic, of course, with COVID-19. There's the economic pandemic and crisis right now, which is overwhelming for many people. I can't imagine when the evictions start to hit and everything else. That really worries me, keeps me up at night sometimes. And then the third thing, of course, is the racial injustice in this country, which is got many of us sick to our stomachs. Then there's the infodemic, I call it. And the misinformation pandemic, because we really are in a time now with social media where things are flying everywhere, and with the control that many groups have of using Facebook, using Twitter, using all the platforms at large to spread this misinformation. It's really, really hard on people, and it's very scary. So what I tell people all the time is one of the greatest things that my good friend David Beard, who's a well-known journalist, and he's worked with Poynter, he now works with Nat Geo and many other big organizations, is you can control your feed to a reasonable degree. Mm-hmm. So filter out all that stuff. And if you want to see some of it because you're a believer now in also keeping track of the misinformation, which is important too. You don't want to just block it out because we need to know what's going on out there, or else we're going around with just what people are telling us, and that's not good.
That's right. That's right. No, and that's important to be aware of it, but also to do something about it.
Right.
But I want to bring up a point. We only have a few minutes left here.
Sure.
There's another issue with that. 17 million people in America today don't even have access to Wi-Fi. So that's important to understand, that you can pick up the phone, the old device, and connect with someone if you don't have Wi-Fi, but also reach out. If you can, share this program. Share it in a way that that you can at least say, hey, you're not alone. And let's hear from you. Let's hear what else you want to talk about, and we will do our best to bring you as much information as possible.
Absolutely. I've been looking down a bit here because I am driving the car from behind the scenes. So I was making sure that we have comments and questions coming in, which we've had coming in, throughout the show. Right now we have one from, let's see, right here. Right. We have one right here from Soraya Rodriguez. This is a live show. We love participation, and we want everybody to chime in as much as possible. So from Soraya, she says, gratitude is getting me through. With introspection, I realized how blessed I am and to savor each moment. Why don't we have Janet and Christina and Kathy, chime in on that.
Yeah, let's do that.
And Tara, I'm so sorry, Tara, and you too.
No, Soraya hit it on the head. I mean, having an attitude of gratitude, like every day, even keeping a gratitude journal or thinking about what you can be thankful for, even in the midst of chaos and vulnerability, definitely adds to our personal and mental well-being. So thank you, Soraya.
Yeah, that's awesome. Christine?
I would just say that there have been some things about the last 6 months for some people that have been really good. And while we are, of course, focusing on the tough stuff and the areas where we need support and work, I think it's okay to say, you know what, this actually has been better in the last 6 months. And this is a change in my life that I'd like to keep going into the future. So to have gratitude and then think about how you can continue that in the next phase of your life can be empowering for folks as well.
I love that. That is so wonderful. Tara, any thoughts?
Tara, you're muted. You need Sarah.
Here we
Tara?
go.
I think Tara doesn't know she's muted. So,
Oh,
Kathy, why don't you go first?
she dropped
Oh.
off now.
Well, that's why I mentioned the family dinners. I mean, that's a blessing in the middle of all of this, is that both my kids are home and we're having evening meals together and laughing. And we haven't had that in a long time because they just haven't been here. And so being grateful for that and relishing it in the midst of all this brings a lot of happiness.
There's Tara now. Let's see if
Tara,
Tara.
now, Tara, we'll give you the last word on the issue of gratitude. Any thoughts on that? Have you experienced that as you go through in your how to deal with this?
Tara is still muted for some reason. I'm trying to let her know that she's unmuted. Let's try.
Yeah, we'll get her back. So we have a limited amount of time, but I wanted to also point out that what you're hearing here is a lot of, in some senses, common sense advice. And what we need to do is make it common practice. These are important, they're real, they're natural, but they're also important to maintain our stability and as we go forward in stress. So I want to thank everybody that has been involved in this amazing conversation. I think having a conversation like this is important. And not only that, having a conversation as you're going through it allows you to have the support and not go at it alone, which is a very important component. I also want to say that by popular demand, we have a great another show coming up next couple of weeks with the one and only Christine as you're heading us up, and we have a scheduled time already for that. As you can see here, small steps to making meaning in chaos, and this builds from how to deal with stress. Where's our purpose? So we're happy that on Sunday we will have you, Christine, and God knows how many more folks will join us here at the barn to have a real conversation. But Tara, we are so grateful to you. Keep up. You know, I know you're in the middle of it now. We wish you the very best. We are with you. We wanna check in with you down the road here to see how you're doing and see how you're coming through. We have put their information on how to get a hold of you if people want to reach out to you and help. Kathy, like always, you're amazing. Thank you for your insights. I love your 5 tips. And what can I say, Dr. Janet Taylor? Janet, thank you. Your insights are amazing. We could do 5 shows on this.
I want to encourage everybody, now that this is our second show, to please share this broadcast. Make sure that even on the replay that people learn about this valuable insight that Dr. Taylor and Dr. Christine Whalen and Kathy Bomji and, of course, Tara have shared here today, and from our host, Emilio, of course. This is a great production. I'm honored to be in it. And Emilio, our third show with Christine is going to be amazing too.
Amelia, can I say thanks for having me? And Kathy, say hi to Cyrus too, please.
Will do.
Awesome. Her husband, we all know very well. Tara, thank you. Have a great Sunday to everybody. I love the tips. And until the next time, let's keep it real. Thank you for the real conversation. And stay well, stay strong. Thank you, guys.
Thanks.